The presentation that you are about to see was recorded live at the American Natural Hygiene Society's 45th Annual International Natural Living Conference, held at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. The speaker for this presentation is Dr. Philip Martin. Dr. Martin is a certified member of the International Association of Hygienic Physicians and is certified for fasting supervision. Dr. Martin was the director of Martin's Health Manor in Toronto, Ontario for many years. He has recently retired from his position as Associate Professor of Clinical Science at the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College in Toronto. Dr. Martin's presentation is entitled Health Concerns of Seniors.
Thank you, Milana. In her introduction, she mentioned my wife was a skin specialist, and it reminds me when we went into practice in the same office, same clinic, we had on our shingle Doctors Martin and Martin, Skin and Bones. Now, being late on the program like this, after you've heard so many lectures, and the lectures always take a little longer than they should, and so it leaves a little less time usually for the last speaker of that series. It reminds me at one time I was on a medical panel, and my topic happened to be sex. On that topic, or that lecture, was also at the end of an evening when other speakers were ahead of me, and they took longer than they should have. And the chairman said, please keep it short, be very brief. Well, I thought I'd do the best I can with the topic of sex in a short time, so I went up on the platform and I said, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great deal of pleasure, and I sat down. Among the many concerns of seniors, one of them could very well be children. To understand this, listen to the following conversation. Mrs. Chatter complained to another woman saying, my children are ruining my health, mentally and physically. And then she asked the woman, and how many children do you have? When the answer was, I don't have any, Mrs. Chatter said, so what do you do for aggravation? May I remind you that almost all of the problems of seniors actually begin with youth, whether it be the plaques that build up in the arteries until later in life, when they cause strokes, heart disease, and impotence, or whether they be the imperceptible little nodules that become full-blown cancers. All these start way back in our youth, usually. Most of us ignore our bodies until they give us trouble. In our energetic youth, we hardly ever think of the consequences of our lifestyle and diet. We take health for granted until it breaks down. And then, far too many people turn to drugs. Over 215,000 die each year in the United States from medical side effects. 185,000 die from the side effects of surgery, and 30,000 die from the side effects of drugs. I feel those are underestimated, but those are in the medical journals. They themselves give these numbers. And 36% of all hospital admissions are due to iatrogenic illness, that is, physician-induced. Whenever doctors have gone out on strike and give only emergency care, the same thing happens in every country in the world. The mortality rate promptly drops. In Saskatchewan, the death rate dropped in 1968 by 18%. In Los Angeles, when the doctor struck in 1976, because they were mad about the malpractice situation, the number of deaths dropped by 18%. In Colombia, South America, dropped by 23%. Now, in Israel, when they had their doctor strike, which lasted about 70 days, the mortality rate dropped by 50%. The undertakers in Israel got very interested in this, of course, and they ran a study which showed that the last time the mortality rate dropped that low was 20 years before, when the doctors had their previous strike. And when the Israeli Medical Society was asked to explain this, they said that during the time of the strike, the doctors weren't bothered with people with these nothing complaints and didn't do any elective surgery, so they were able to devote all their energies to the really sick ones and save more lives, which convinces me that we should always have a doctor's strike. Today, I propose to present to you a program that I offer to my patients, not only to seniors, to help them to prevent disease or to successfully overcome their complaints, and also to help them achieve dynamic wellness and fitness. And this is what I tell them. You live in a body that is incredible and has incredible innate healing wisdom. If you accidentally cut yourself, the skin knits itself back together again. If you fracture a bone, it knits itself back together again. True healing power comes only from within. Now, the very same healing power that heals cuts and bones can do much more if only we give it the opportunity to do so. I have seen people that heal themselves of conditions that are considered hopeless and incurable, such as tumors, rheumatoid arthritis, high blood pressure, and more, much more, without drugs or surgery. It is your body. You own it. You can take control of it. You can direct the course of your own health without having to trust blindly in anyone else to do it for you. You can prevent and even reverse serious health problems. Your body has numerous regulating mechanisms that help to maintain it and perfect it. Just a few examples are body temperature, blood pressure, and heart rate. This innate intelligence and ability of the body to keep itself in proper balance, to maintain itself, and even to perfect itself is known medically as homeostasis. This $5 word reminds me of the agitated woman who walked into a public hospital. "What can I do for you?" a receptionist asked politely. "I want to see an upturn," the woman said. "Oh, you mean an intern?" "Well, I want a contamination." "Oh, you mean an examination?" "Anyhow, I want to go to the fraternity ward." "Oh, no, you mean the maternity ward." At that, the woman got excited. Upturn, intern, contamination, examination, fraternity, maternity, what the hell? All I know is that I haven't demonstrated this month. And there's something wrong with my Ovaltines. I think I'm stagnant. Your body has protective mechanisms that are without equal. Even the impressive technological advances don't come close to the fantastic, incredible defensive apparatus within us. Some of these we don't even think of as being protective, such as the ordinary sneeze, which can be a powerful force to expel a foreign object, or diarrhea, an ingenious healing method for the body to get rid of poisons and toxins. And of course, there are many other examples, but time doesn't permit to dwell on these. The most sophisticated, elaborate, and complex of all the defensive and protective devices is the immune system. It encompasses organs such as the thymus gland and the lymph nodes and an elaborate array of cells such as lymphocytes, phagocytes, beta cells, helper cells, literally trillions of cells, like armies, ready and willing to protect the body from virtually all infection from all assaults. If we have such magnificent protection, why are so many people suffering? Why are there degenerative diseases that are so rampant in our culture? Because too often the immune cells are like soldiers without bullets when they are not properly nourished and when they are not reinforced by a proper lifestyle. And also because we expose our bodies to insults faster than our natural immune process can neutralize them. Some of these insults, like radiation and pollution in our environment, we have little control over as individuals. But there are insults we do have control over, such as smoking, booze, junk food, and so on, that overwhelm the system to the point that it is more than it can handle. Also, we do not give our bodies enough of the vital raw materials needed to fortify their self-repairing systems. We don't give them the ammunition. The program I am about to present is not only to live a longer life, but perhaps even more important, an enjoyable one, without suffering aches and pains and sickness. I would like to tell you about a venerable old man at this time who was celebrating his 100th birthday. A reporter asked him, "To what do you attribute your advanced age and remarkable physical condition?" "I'll tell you," replied the centenarian. "When I got married, the rabbi who performed the ceremony advised that whenever I saw an argument coming, I should take a walk around the block. I took his advice, and I want you to know that for 70 years the constant exercise did wonders for my health." As a living, breathing organism, the body has needs that have to be met. Needs for the exercise, rest, fresh air, pure water, sunshine, emotional poise, nourishing food, love, and sex. If what it receives in any of these areas is substandard, or if one area is unbalanced with respect to the others, it cannot perform fully as nature intended. That is an inescapable fact of life. We do not get a choice in what our bodies need. Our choice comes in how we decide to respond to those needs. Those are the same sentiments that were so eloquently expressed by Dr. Burton last night. Now, I tell my patients there are 5 basic components to the detoxification program that I give my patients. And each one is equally important. Each one is critical for attaining and maintaining dynamic wellness. Let me start with activity. Not because it is more important, but I must begin somewhere, of course. Now, there are many good activities like bicycling, swimming, running, and many good activities, but you have to buy a bicycle, you have to learn how to ride it, you have to learn how to swim, you have to find a swimming pool. So I suggest to my patients that they walk for 1 hour every day of the week, briskly. Now, when I mention that, I tell them why. I just don't say, do as I say, but rather, this is why you should. And here are just a few reasons, because you can spend a whole lecture on just that alone. But I'll mention osteoporosis. It's the very best way to prevent osteoporosis or to cure osteoporosis. When the astronauts go up into space, and because of the lack of gravity, they get very, very osteoporotic. And when they come back down on Earth again, they're put through gravitational exercises, including walking, which is one of the best gravitational exercises, and they regain all the bone quality that they have lost. Another good reason for walking, when you do that on a regular basis every day for a period of time, like 5 or 10 minutes obviously wouldn't do this. It should be at least half hour, but I recommend an hour every day. When one does that, there are enkephalins and endorphins that form in the brain. And they are very interesting, powerful substances. One is morphine-like. It prevents pain. The other one is like a street drug. The only advantage of it is that it doesn't cost as much as street drug, and it's not dangerous like street drugs, but it gives you euphoria, a lift, a good feeling, one that we should all have every single day. It certainly would prevent depression, and we see too much of that. But I didn't want you to feel that any one of these 5 parts of the program in itself is enough to solve your problem of health and wellness. Because, I'll give you an example. There was a man by the name of Fix who some years ago wrote a bestseller on how to prevent heart attacks by running. Many of you might be aware or familiar with that book. Well, he happened to die from a heart attack while he was running. And it must probably be because he thought that was all you had to do. Now, I want to emphasize, it's very important, but it is only one of 5 parts. Another of the 5 parts that I mentioned to my patients is daylight. Now, I deliberately use the word daylight instead of sunlight because where we come from, we really don't have enough sunlight. There are cloudy days and dull days, but we must be exposed to that daylight, not through windows or windshields, but directly, and then we will derive a lot of benefits and a lot of goodness. Again, a whole lecture could be given just on daylight alone, but I'll mention 2 or 3 examples of what it could do for you. First of all, when the light goes into, I should mention this first because every one of you, I'm sure, is familiar with the fact that the best source of vitamin D is from the rays of the daylight. And we must have that for wellness and good health. Like all other vitamins, it plays a very essential role, and that's the best source, daylight. Then, beside that, the light enters the eyes and reaches a gland called the pineal gland, just behind the forehead, in front of the brain, and there it develops melatonin. And from there it goes on through the blood-brain barrier into the brain proper, and there it helps to form serotonin, which is a hormone and has a lot of wonderful functions, as all hormones do. A couple of the functions that I might mention are, it is a neurotransmitter. It helps transmit nerve energy from the brain to all parts of the body. Also, and then again, needed by ever so many, it's a mood modifier. It prevents you from getting depressed and prevents you from getting hyper. A mood modifier. And so many of my patients could really use that in their lifestyle. Now, rest. That is the next category, the next component. And you've heard about it from Dr. Ron Cridland. He has done a lot of study on rest, and he's filled you in with a lot of details. For example, if you don't have enough rest, you cannot benefit from the activity, from running, because you get overtired and it does you more harm than good. So you must have a lot of rest. 9 to 10 hours of rest is marvelous, and you'll feel the benefits when you experiment with that. And you'll be able to carry on, because when you're resting, that's when healing takes place. When you're resting, that's when, and the only way, you have nerve energy regenerated. Because all day long, there's dissipation of nerve energy, innervation, and the opportunity to rebuild that is only when you're resting. And because you've heard about that from Dr. Cridland at some length, I'll just leave that now and say it's equally important to the others, and then go on to the other category of emotional poise. The psychological, the spiritual, the emotional, and the mental well-being of a person is extremely important in wellness. You cannot be well unless you have homeostasis of the psychological portion of the organism. This state that we're talking about can be referred to as the power of the mind to heal. And just to give a couple of examples, one, I had a patient many years ago when I practiced in Hamilton, and I was called out to see this man in a senior citizens establishment, St. Joseph's, and for the first time. And when I saw him and he gave me his history, he was a former postmaster general of the post office in Hamilton, and he spoke about the time he had an accident and he was in a wheelchair. And the doctor said to him, he told me, and these are his words, "You'll never walk again." And he said to the doctor, "You get out of my sight. I never want to see you again. Don't you ever dare come near me again." That's the power of the mind wanting to heal, and it makes a difference. He was walking. He could walk upstairs, downstairs, walk very, very well. When I saw him, he was very elderly. He had a cane. But believe me, he had made remarkable recovery and didn't need a wheelchair, as the doctor had said. Another example, and there are many studies, research studies, to show the power of the mind to heal. They had rats in an experiment that were just given a sweet drink, and that was their only sustenance. And after some time of that kind of ingestion, they introduced into the sweet drink an emetic substance that makes them nauseous and vomiting. And so they continued drinking and vomiting day after day because it was the only thing that was given to them. After a certain length of time, the emetic substance was taken out of the drink. And, as you've guessed, the rats continued to vomit even with the sweet drink without the substance introduced. Most of them, that is. There were a few exceptions. Now, there are many books of interest on this topic of the power of the mind to heal. One is by Simonton. He's an oncologist, a tumor specialist, and his wife is a psychologist. They work together in a hospital where there are terminal ill cancer patients. The book is called Getting Well, and it's fascinating reading. Very, very interesting. How they get their people without drugs and without surgery to have less pain and to live a longer span of life. Not a full length of life, but a longer span than the other people. And then there's Bernie Siegel, Dr. Bernie Siegel, a surgeon who writes about love and healing. And then there's Norman Cousins, whose latest book, I think, is Head First. Now, he's a very interesting writer. You'll enjoy reading him. He was a journalist. He cured himself of an incurable disease, and he tells you about it in some of his other books. And then we come last but not least to nutritional part of the program. Now, the nutritional part of the program is one that has been dealt with so much while you're here, but never, never enough. You can go on hearing about it, believe me, because it does us all a lot of good, the doctors as well as the patients. As a matter of fact, when introducing a program like this, it's reinforcing for the doctor. We need it. We're human. We have our weaknesses. We need some encouragement, reinforcement, just as everyone else does. And by introducing this to the patients, we offer them, we receive rather, a lot in return. And I should say to the patients that I should pay them the fee for what they do for me in presenting the program. Now, with regard to the nutritional part, let me first tell you about Winston Churchill, a former Prime Minister of England, when he was meeting with George Bernard Shaw, the playwright and writer, who was a vegetarian and very slender, and Winston Churchill was very obese. And Winston Churchill, very well known for his wit, said to George Bernard Shaw, "You look like you've just come through a famine." And George Bernard Shaw, equally witty, said, "And it looks like you have created the famine." Now, I want to emphasize that one shouldn't feel about nutrition, about food, more than they do about anything else that contributes to health, as I mentioned. Don't develop a neurosis. Don't get obsessed with that. Just eat what comes naturally, meaning, of course, the obvious fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and some grains. And when I say that, naturally, and you know this, it's much better if a lot of it was raw, for obvious reasons, but it does not have to be a completely raw vegan menu. Speaking of vegan menus, I have an interesting menu with me that I will distribute at the workshop after we leave here and go downstairs, and also some other handouts that might be of interest to you. Now, to allow myself enough time for the workshop, we're going to be dealing with the kind of things that not only seniors, but everyone has concerns about and wonders what to do about, such as hemorrhoids, varicose veins, incontinence, prostate, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, headaches, problems with ears, knee problems, psoriasis, hiatus hernia, constipation. I've mentioned a number of things, and if time will permit, we'll try and cover all that and more during the workshop, which follows immediately after this lecture, and I'll be heading for that room 105. We live in exciting times. Innovative, natural ways of rebuilding health are coming more to the forefront. You know that. The whole purpose of my talk was to inform you of the many choices you can make for helping your body to normalize itself, to detoxify, if you will. Options that are given little attention by most conventional doctors. The more you know about what is possible, the more control you can exercise over your own health. So I end in saying, may you all enjoy the full experience of recreating your own health the way you want it to be. Thank you.
The American Natural Hygiene Society teaches people how to maximize their health potential by living in harmony with nature. The society, which is dedicated to health education, is the oldest national vegetarian organization in the United States. Its motto, "Healthcare is Self-Care," is a reminder that health is the result of healthful living. For more information about the American Natural Hygiene Society, its award-winning publication Health Science Magazine, and for a complete list of all the Society's books and tapes, call 813-855-6607 or write American Natural Hygiene Society, P.O. Box 30630, Tampa, Florida 33630. This recording was made possible by a grant from the James Hervey Johnson Charitable Educational Trust and the support of the members of the American Natural Hygiene Society. The presentation that you are about to see was recorded live at the American Natural Hygiene Society's 45th Annual International Natural Living Conference, held at the University of San Diego, California. The speaker for this presentation is Dr. Alan Goldhamer. Dr. Goldhamer is the director of the Center for Conservative Therapy in Pen Grove, California. He is a certified member and former vice president of the International Association of Hygienic Physicians. Dr. Goldhamer is a frequent speaker at health conferences throughout the United States and Canada. Dr. Goldhamer's presentation is entitled, "The Role of Diet in Health and Disease."
The topic of my concern this morning is diet, and in particular the role that diet plays in health and also in disease. I think the first question we should ask ourselves in beginning a discussion about diet is, why is it that we bother to eat? Seems like it takes an awful lot of time and energy to have to go through that process 3 or more times a day of ingesting these substances. Why is it that we do that? Well, from a biological viewpoint, it's quite clear. There are certain things that we need to get from outside our bodies, things that we need to obtain that we cannot make ourselves. Those things include proteins, essential fatty acids, a source of fuel, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and water. Without a consistent supply of these materials, we would not continue to be able to function. So then the next question should be, does it really matter how we go about getting those substances? Does it matter what it is or what form it is we take those substances in? And you've heard evidence this weekend that in fact it does. That in fact, even if you manage to get those necessary nutrients into your diet, if you get them along with unnecessary substances such as excess fat and protein, dietary drugs including things like caffeine and alcohol and tobacco, and refined carbohydrates and chemicals, that the ingestion of these extra substances, even though your nutrient needs may be met, can be devastating, and particularly in terms of long-term chronic degenerative disease. We know now that the vast majority of premature death, that is death before our biological potentials, and certainly the vast majority of the suffering that people go through in our society, is due today to chronic diseases that are caused primarily by the ingestion of excess, not inadequate nutrients, excess fat and protein, as well as these other substances. And the conditions that we know are associated with this range from atherosclerotic vascular disease, that is the things associated with heart disease and stroke, to cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, cirrhosis of the liver, respiratory illnesses, and the list goes on. The majority of problems that people face today in terms of their health are caused by ingesting excess quantities, not inadequate quantities. And that's very important, because if you look at the promotional literature today in nutrition, and much of what's being practiced by health practitioners, they are still continuing to treat ailments as if they are deficiency conditions, and at recommending pills and potions and powders and different substances and specialized approaches trying to correct these purported deficiency problems. I think probably the greatest concern that Western culture has to have in terms of diet must be animal foods. And animal foods include meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products. it's currently in vogue to suggest that changing the color of our meat from red to white or something may have some profound effect on health, and in fact, not true. Changing the color of meat is not going to have a profound impact on health, and in fact, the answer in terms of animal products is the elimination of animal products from the diet, all animal products. It's interesting to note that of all the animals on the planet that include meat in their diet, man is the only animal that I've been able to find that's unable to break down uric acid to allantoin, because we do not contain the necessary enzyme uricase. Now, because we can't break down this enzyme, this product, because we don't have the enzyme, that leads to an accumulation of uric acid in the body when animal products are eaten. And we all know the conditions that are associated with that, things such as gout. It's also interesting to note that when you look at vegetarians compared to meat eaters, vegetarians have massively smaller quantities of circulating bile acids. Now, bile acids are those pigments produced by the liver. Some of you may be familiar with them. They can be yellow or green. They're very caustic and irritative. Oftentimes when people go on fast and their body decides to do some housekeeping, they become aware of just how irritative bile acids can be. It's interesting to note, because when you think about this very irritating caustic substances that's present in as much as 5 times the quantity in meat eaters, you realize that these acids are constantly being processed through the gastrointestinal tract, through the gut. And that constant irritation may in fact be one of the sources for the increased risks associated with eating animal products. Not to mention the fact that, for example, people eating large quantities of animal products in their diet have a much slower transit time. That is, food moves through the intestinal tract much slower. Animal products present other problems as well because they're a source of parasites and contamination. Uncooked or improperly cooked meat, fish, fowl, and dairy products are associated with all kinds of parasites. For example, trichinosis is found in pork or beef-contaminated pork. Bacterial infections from salmonellosis is found in milk products and other animal products. And, you know, it's interesting that many people that think they have the flu because they have the symptoms associated with flu actually don't have the flu at all. What they have is food poisoning. And, of course, recently we've become aware of just how deadly, even in the short term, animal products can be from people consuming improperly processed products at Jack in the Box. I think, what are they going to have to start putting little warning labels on the hamburgers, you know? Might not be a bad idea. I always like the politicizing that goes along with an outbreak like this. The hamburger people at McDonald's say, well, it's really or at Jack in the Box, say it was really, they just didn't give us the right meat. The meat had all these terrible poisons in it. And the meat producers say, well, no, you just didn't cook it right. You didn't cook it at a high enough temperature to kill off those toxic poisons. And of course, we start passing recommendations for laws that, you know, require different processing or different treatments, but nobody actually gets down and suggests, well, maybe we shouldn't be eating these products that are so highly toxic that they can kill us. There are also a multitude of chemical agents, such as nitrates, as well as the fact that animal products are processed with, the animals themselves are fed with hormones and other types of drugs and steroids in order to induce their profitability. You need to also remember that animal products are generally heated fats. You eat animal products in the heated form, and all heated fats, particularly animal fats, are associated with a high exposure to free radicals. And free radicals are those highly reactive molecules that are capable of damaging almost any cell in the body. We know that free radicals have been shown to cause alterations to collagen and elastin tissues and lead to premature aging of the skin and connective tissue. They contribute to the accumulation of what are called intracellular debris, things such as lipofuscin and creoid, which are thought to be actually important components in the aging process itself. So in addition to parasites, bacterial infection, toxic poisons, carcinogenic agents, and free radicals, animal products also all suffer from a very serious problem of biological concentration. When you think about it, animals consume very large quantities of grain, which is one of the reasons when you look at excellent books like Beyond Beef, or John Robbins' book's Diet for a New America, they point out the incredibly huge impact on our environment that the consumption of animal-based products have. Because animals are consuming large quantities of grasses and grains, which to a greater or lesser extent are processed with pesticides and herbicides and other chemicals, those animals get exposed to a large volume of these toxins, which tend to accumulate biologically in their cells, so particularly in their fat cells. So they continue to take in these poisons that are concentrated at an ever-greater degree. And then we turn around and eat those animal products that can then concentrate in our own cells. This biological concentration exposes us to ever-increasing quantities of potentially toxic substances. As if this weren't enough reason to be concerned about the use of meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, animal products are also completely devoid of fiber. Animal products are nothing but fat and protein. There is no fiber at all. And the one deficiency that people do commonly experience in our society is in fact a fiber deficiency. And a large reason why people are developing fiber deficiencies is because we eat large amounts of animal products as a society. But probably the biggest concern that I would have about animal products is that they're extremely high in protein. And in spite of what millions of dollars of meat and dairy industry advertising would have you believe, it is in fact excess, not inadequate protein that is one of the major threats to health in Western society. If you include animal products in the diet, even in what would be normally considered moderate amounts, it is virtually impossible to put together a diet that's consistent with the current scientific literature about optimum human health and nutrition. At this point, I'd really like to go into a little bit of detail on protein. And the reason I want to do that is because so many people have been so misled about protein that I think without a little bit of factual background, it's difficult to overcome the fears that have been indoctrinated into us. The role of protein in the diet is perhaps the single most misunderstood topic in human nutrition today. So let's first start with a technical definition of protein. A protein is a group of complex organic nitrogenous compounds for which form the principal constituents of the cell. In other words, protein makes up the guts of the cell that are the building blocks of our body. Many of our structural and functional components of our cells are made up of various proteins. In human beings, proteins function in many different capacities. They act as what are called organic catalysts in the formation of enzymes. They act as messengers, such as peptide hormones, and as antibodies that protect us from the effects of microorganisms. They act as the carrier agents in our blood to transport oxygen and gases, as well as forming the very most important structural components of the cell. When you look at proteins, we find they're all composed of amino acids. And it's interesting to note that proteins are not only associated with all life forms, that is, all life forms from single-celled protozoa to man, but also all life forms need some form of preformed amino acids in their diet. There isn't any life form on the planet that doesn't need to get some preformed amino acids from the outside. An amino acid, I said, is what makes up proteins. It is an organic compound that has an amino and a carboxyl group. And those amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. That is, you make proteins by putting various combinations of amino acids together. Now, in nature, there are literally dozens of naturally occurring amino acids. But the proteins in our bodies are made up of just 20. Of these 20 amino acids, our body's actually able to make 12 of them internally. It can make those from the carbon-based, it's from starch or sugar. It can create those 12 amino acids, which means there are 8 amino acids we can't make ourselves. And so they give the term essential amino acids to these 8 amino acids. So although our body can recycle the essential amino acids, it cannot produce them. Therefore, the diet must contain a supply of these so that we have the raw materials in the form of essential amino acids to replace obligatory losses. That is, losses that we're not able to recycle. Without getting enough essential amino acids in the diet, the body's reserves would eventually become depleted, and this starvation process would lead to death. Now, we get these essential amino acids by eating foods that contain them. However, the proteins of plants and animals are completely useless to us unless our body's able to break them down, absorb them, and assimilate them. Our digestive systems in human beings are not designed to absorb the very large protein molecules, only the smaller amino acids and peptides. And once absorbed, these amino acids then become the raw materials from which our bodies synthesize the larger proteins that serve these vital functions. In other words, what happens is we eat proteins, but those proteins have to be broken down to amino acids. Those amino acids are absorbed, and then our bodies take those amino acids and produces the proteins that it needs to carry on function. So far, what I've said is that proteins are very important to our bodies, that they're synthesized from various combinations of 20 amino acids, that our bodies can make all but 8 of these amino acids, and that we get these 8 essential amino acids by eating foods that contain proteins, by breaking the proteins down to amino acids, absorbing them, and then reforming them into the necessary proteins. Why don't we look for just a moment at the actual metabolism of protein. The digestion of protein actually begins in our stomachs. And that's because in our stomachs it gets exposed to an enzyme which is called pepsin, which is secreted in the digestive juices. And it's activated by hydrochloric acid. Now, contrary to some popular beliefs, hydrochloric acid really has nothing to do with the actual digestion of protein. All it does is create an environment which activates the enzymes to allow them to do their job. Now, there's a good reason that's true. What would happen if these enzymes produced in the pancreas would be activated in an alkaline environment like you find in the pancreas? What would those enzymes do? It would break down protein. Well, what's the pancreas made out of? Protein. So the way the body kind of keeps us from getting into too much trouble is those enzymes don't do anything until they get into an acid media. And that acid media is found in the stomach, and the acid media is created by the hydrochloric acid. Now, this is followed by the production of other protein digestive factors, or proteolytic enzymes, which are produced by the pancreas and the mucosal cells of the small intestine. This process of protein digestion, as you'll find all of the processes of nutrition, are actually quite complex. There's lots of different steps that goes on. It's not just a simple ABC phenomena. There's lots of negative feedback mechanisms and complex physiology that's going on. I would like to ask, let's do a little quiz here to test your nutrition knowledge. I'd like somebody to tell me where it is that strict vegans, that is people that eat no meat, fish, fowl, eggs, or dairy products, get most of their protein from. Who can tell me? Vegetables? Who else has a suggestion? Nuts? Nuts and seeds? Grains? Avocados? Okay, you're all wrong. You're all wrong. Now, how can that be? How could we all be wrong? From the air? No, not from the air. The fact is that strict hygienists, strict vegetarians and vegans get their protein from the same place that meat eaters do. The majority of protein in the diet of human beings is derived from flesh, human flesh. The fact is, even the strictest vegetarian is not only a meat eater, but a cannibal. The majority of protein in the diet is obtained from recycled human flesh. In your intestinal tract, gut epithelial cells, digestive enzymes, and other tissues are constantly being sloughed and recycled. And so I want you to remember that. Sometimes, as Dr. Cridlin mentioned the other day, if our halos get a little too tight. Human beings under our hygienic model eat nothing but animal products for the first 6 months to 2 years of life in the form of breast milk. And in fact, throughout our continuous existence, our primary source of protein is in fact human flesh. Studies by NASET show that regardless of the amino acid mix of a meal, the intestinal tract remains a remarkably similar ratio of amino acids. The mixing of endogenous, that is this internal recycled protein, and dietary protein is a very, very important concept. Because until this was discovered, it was generally believed that in order to absorb and utilize the essential amino acids in the diet, it was thought that the diet must contain all the amino acids in certain proportions and present it all at the same time. This mistaken belief dates back to 1914, when Osborne and Mendel studied the protein requirements of laboratory rats. They found that rats grew faster on animal sources of protein than vegetable sources. And this was followed up by studies by Ellman in 1939 using purified and isolated amino acids, again, in rats. Now, fortunately, we've learned a lot since 1939. But even today, many so-called nutrition experts continue to advance the ancient concept that, we have to get all of these amino acids at the same time in order to make use of them. And much of the protein combining and protein quality arguments that you hear today are based on these misconceptions that have yet to be corrected. According again to NASET writing in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the mixing of endogenous or internal protein is the body's way of regulating the relative concentrations of the amino acids available for absorption. We know now that the body is quite capable of taking so-called incomplete proteins and making them complete by utilizing this recycling mechanism. Thus, the 1 to 200 grams of endogenous protein, that is internally recycled protein, is added to the 30 to 100 grams of dietary protein in order to give us the appropriate mix. It's interesting, if you look at research that's used to support the mistaken idea that all essential amino acids must be present at the same time at each meal for amino acids to be absorbed and utilized, you find that that research didn't really even say that, because it really stated that essential amino acids must be present at the site of protein synthesis, that is, within the cells of the liver, the kidney, and the muscle. And because the recycling effect of the body's amino acid was not recognized, the assumption was made that the only source of protein was from the diet. And that, as I've explained, is quite false. Not only do we get the majority of our amino acids from recycling, but in 1961, Bender, gentlemen, did some research and showed that animals were able to maintain slow growth with proteins completely lacking individual essential amino acids. The important fact here is that the majority of amino acids absorbed from your intestinal tract are derived from recycled body protein, and that we are, in a sense, all flesh eaters. And actually, when you think about it, what's the most complete protein for human beings? What would be the most well-balanced to our own tissues? Yeah, our own tissues. Once absorbed, this combination of internally recycled protein and dietary protein passes by way of what's called the portal vein to the liver. The liver then monitors the absorption of amino acids and adjusts their rate according to the body needs. So I'll just summarize what we've said. We said that proteins are very important to our bodies, that our proteins are derived from 20 amino acids, of which our body is able to make all but 8, and we call these 8 essential amino acids, that we get these from the diet, that these proteins are digested by proteolytic enzymes into amino acids, and that the addition of recycled proteins ensures that an amino acid mixture is going to be adequate regardless of what happens to be a short-term temporary shortage of one amino acid or another. And also that the belief that all essential amino acids must be taken at the same time is in fact false. It's clear that we have a source of protein to replace amino acids that are not recycled. We must be able to get a source of this protein. No question about it. The question really is how much. And of course, this has been a question that's been dealt with since 1830, when a Dutch scientist named Mulder first coined the term protein. If you go back to 1865, a gentleman named Playfair in England presented studies that led him to believe that the diet of the average healthy man should contain 119 grams of protein a day. And later there was a guy named Voigt who studied Munich brewery workers, people that worked in the brewery, and he found that they consumed 190 grams of protein a day. Now, I just want to put this in context. Currently, the RDA is about 56 grams of protein. So at that time, he studied these brewery workers, and he found that they ate 190 grams of protein a day. And so he concluded that, based on his studies, people should take 125 grams of protein a day. It wasn't until 1913 that a guy named Hindhead looked up the mortality rates of those brewery workers that Voigt had studied. And he said, quote, "Surely it is not in accordance with nature that most men should die before their 40th year." Because what it turned out was, yeah, those brewery workers ate a lot of protein, and they also didn't live very long. We still need to be reminded today that because something is common does certainly not make it healthy. In 1947, at the University of Rochester Laboratories, a project was established to determine the essential amino acid requirements of the adult male rat. And in order to keep the intake of calories and nitrogen constant, the animals were fed a synthetic diet by means of a stomach tube. Now, the problem is, then people take this data and try to extrapolate it to human beings. And as we'll see, oftentimes serious mistakes are made. More recently, there's been studies of protein metabolism in man, human beings, using what are called nitrogen balance data as a parameter. Nitrogen balance studies measure the amount of nitrogen in the form of dietary protein that's consumed, and then they figure out how much is excreted in the urine, the feces, the skin losses, sweat, hair, semen, menstrual fluid, and even the breath. Because there's lots of different ways you can lose these tissues. The idea is, though, that if the amount of protein eaten is as much as that's given off, the person's going to be in some type of balance, what they call nitrogen balance. Now, because we have a vital need for a substance, because something's very important, twice or three times that amount does not mean that that's going to be even better. And in the case of protein, that concept that more is better is dead wrong. The fact is that all natural foods, from lettuce to nuts, contain varying amounts of proteins. And if we get a diet from a variety of whole natural foods that meets our caloric needs, it's virtually impossible to get a diet that doesn't have an appropriate amount of protein in it. It's important to note that even if the diet not only is devoid of meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, but also doesn't consume any nuts or cereal grains, it's just derived from fruits and vegetables, there's still no problem getting adequate protein if the total amount of calories taken is enough to meet our needs. Now, many times people question me on that, and so what I've done is I've prepared a handout. I'd like a few people to come up and help me pass this out. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, so I'll have to use this again. Now, as these are coming around, I'm going to explain to you what you're going to be looking at. All I've done is I've taken a diet for one day, and that diet was brown rice and broccoli. Morning, noon, and night. 3 cups of rice and 3 cups of broccoli for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, I'm not advocating that this is the diet that everybody should always consume. Obviously, eventually, it's possible people may look for a little more variety. The point I was trying to make was, even if we just took 2 foods, brown rice and broccoli, for example, and we ate enough of that to meet our caloric needs, I wanted to take a look at what that would contain in terms of the essential nutrients. Now, most people would say, well, gee, brown rice and broccoli, you couldn't live on that, because where would you get your protein from? You know, most people are so deluded to believing if you don't eat some kind of dead, decaying flesh every day, you're going to develop some kind of critical deficiency and die. Now, as you look at this sheet, you'll notice that it says that the following is a list of nutrient contents of 3 meals, each consisting of 3 cups of cooked broccoli and 3 cups of cooked brown rice. The total amount of calories from this quantity of food is 2,352. Now that's 106%, or about what the RDA, or recommended daily allowance, for an adult female is. Okay, when it says percentage RDA, those are the percentages of the RDA for an adult female 20 to 50 years old. So it has enough calories. Now let's look over to the left-hand column where it says protein, the third item down. It says the amount of protein is 82.17 grams. That's 164% of the RDA for protein. And that's without any meat, fish, fowl, eggs, or dairy products, nuts, seeds in the diet, any what are considered concentrated protein foods. Now actually, that's too high. 82 grams of protein is too much protein. Now granted, this is vegetable-based protein, not animal-based protein, so there's not the high concentration of a sulfur amino acid, so it wouldn't be as bad as 82 grams of animal protein, but that's still pretty concentrated. Now fortunately, we don't have people eating just brown rice and broccoli. We dilute this diet down with some fresh fruits and salad and other things, so we shouldn't get protein toxicity, right? The point is, getting the quantity of protein is not a problem. Now people say, oh, well, wait a second, though. Okay, maybe you get enough quantity of protein, but do you get the, quote, quality of protein? Do you get the essential amino acids? Now what I've done is, if you look at the bottom of the left-hand column and the bottom of the right-hand column, you'll notice a lot of long words like tryptophan and isoleucine and lysine and cytosine and tyrosine and histidine. And those are the names of the essential and some other amino acids. We've listed actually 12, I think, amino acids there. And I've given you the RDAs for each of those essential amino acids, how much the RDA suggests an individual needs. And you'll notice that the limiting amino acid, in this case, should be cysteine, right? Okay. Cysteine is the, quote, limiting amino acid. There's 185%, almost twice as much cysteine as the RDA suggests you need. Actually, the limiting amino acids aren't as limiting in relation to the RDA as the total protein is. There is no problem getting the quantity or the quality of protein or essential amino acids that are needed. Now, if you'll go through this list with me, you'll notice there's all kinds of vitamins and minerals listed. And with the exception of vitamin B12, which we'll discuss later, all of these nutrients that are listed meet or exceed the RDAs. Now, we can argue about the RDAs, whether they're valid or not, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But the point is, even if you use the traditionally accepted standards, and even if you only ate brown rice and broccoli, you still don't have any problem getting the calcium. If you look here at calcium, we've got 821 milligrams of calcium in this particular diet. Vitamin C, there's 1,044 milligrams. That's 1,739% of the RDA. Vitamin E, vitamin A, on down the list. It doesn't take a concentrated diet in order to meet our nutrient needs. I think we should probably also spend a few minutes getting into some substantive details on vitamins as well. And the reason I want to talk specifically about vitamins is because so many people spend so much time and energy and money purchasing vitamins under the mistaken belief that vitamin deficiencies are responsible for their symptoms, or that taking vitamin pills is some kind of insurance, and if a little is good, a lot is better, and they can do no harm. Vitamins are organic compounds, just like proteins are, and they're needed for normal metabolic functioning. And if you don't get necessary vitamins, if they're not there, there's a specific metabolic defect that will occur. In other words, a vitamin is something that your body has to have to function properly, but doesn't make enough of itself. It's been suggested that millions of years ago in human evolution, there was an advantage gained by humans by eliminating the biosynthetic machinery that was necessary for the production of substances that were plentiful in the environment. In other words, if there was something in the environment that there was a lot of, that there may have been an advantage at giving up the biosynthetic machinery that was necessary to make that substance. So at this point in our evolutionary history, our bodies are not able to synthesize their own vitamins, as much simpler organisms still do. organisms like Neurospis synthesize virtually all of their vitamin needs. And except for guinea pigs and the Indian fruit-eating bat, humans are the only mammals that cannot make their own vitamin C. So why is it that humans need to get these outside nutrients? And I'll just briefly tell you about a study in 1967 at the University of California, Los Angeles, a guy named Zamenhof. They studied 2 strains of bacteria that were identical in every way, except that one had a mutation that eliminated its ability to assimilate, that is, synthesize an essential amino acid, which was tryptophan. When equal quantities of these 2 strains of bacteria were placed in a tryptophan-deficient nutrient media, the mutant strain, that is, the one that did not have the ability to make tryptophan, died. Quite clearly. Didn't have tryptophan, it couldn't make it, it died. However, when the same 2 strains were placed in a nutrient medium that contained adequate tryptophan, a remarkable thing happened. Not only did the mutant strain survive, that is the one that didn't know how to make tryptophan, but it actually took over. Within a short time, the mutant completely eliminated the original strain. It's apparent that having to support the biosynthetic machinery for the production of tryptophan, at least in this case, was a disadvantage. And that original strain was not able to compete successfully with the other strain that didn't have to maintain that excess machinery. Okay, what I'm going to have to do at this point is conclude. And all I want to say is that, you know, health does result from healthful living. And when it comes to diet, it's not that complex. If you get everything that you put in your tube is whole natural foods, that is fresh raw fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, or legumes, you're going to get the quantity and the quality of the nutrients that you need. Thank you very much.
The American Natural Hygiene Society teaches people how to maximize their health potential by living in harmony with nature. The society, which is dedicated to health education, is the oldest national vegetarian organization in the United States. Its motto, "Healthcare is Self-Care," is a reminder that health is the result of healthful living. For more information about the American Natural Hygiene Society, its award-winning publication Health Science Magazine, and for a complete list of all the Society's books and tapes, call 813-855-6607 or write American Natural Hygiene Society, P.O. Box 30630, Tampa, Florida 33630. This recording was made possible by a grant from the James Hervey Johnson Charitable Educational Trust and the support of the members of the American Natural Hygiene Society.